We shall next hear the presentation by our distinguished guest, Dr. Roger Pfister, head of the International Cooperation, Swiss Academies of Arts and Sciences, Bern, Switzerland. Hello and kindly welcome.
A very good morning to you. Can we just briefly check? You can hear me, I hope?
Yes, very well.
I use the slides from my side. I think it's easier to navigate for me to navigate through. Is that in order for you, or do you want to share it from your side?
They say it's perfect.
Okay. Just 1 second. I think you can see it now. Is that in order?
Yes. Yes.
Good. Well, a very good morning again to all of you, wherever you are, near and far. It's quite fascinating these days with these Zoom meetings, but it's a pleasure to be with you. As the colleague already said, my name is Roger Pfister. I'm head of international cooperation at the Swiss Academies of Arts and Sciences. And at the back of my screen, you see the building where we are located in Bern, in the capital of Switzerland. Getting towards autumn time, I suppose that's probably the case with you, where you're sitting in many parts of Europe as well, where you are sitting. It's a great pleasure to be here, and I thank the organizers of the European Science Festival sincerely for their invitation to speak about the work of the Swiss Academies of Arts and Sciences in this session on the role of science in Europe today. It's also a particular privilege, I must say, to be part of a session with speakers from several renowned organizations, such as the European Academy of Sciences and Arts, but also the European Research Council or the Royal Society in the UK. And let me add that it is most gratifying also to note that the composition of this session pays tribute to the fact that science is really borderless and can best come to fruition by way of cooperation, irrespective of challenges imposed by political contexts. And so in considering the title of the current session, I'm therefore rather grateful for the opportunity to talk on behalf of the Swiss Academies of Arts and Sciences about their work and their contribution to society in the largest sense of the word, both at home in Switzerland, but also in Europe. As a national platform, the Swiss Academies are an honest, reliable, and trustworthy, I think, knowledge broker that facilitates a dialogue between science and society includes also, in our perspective, policy making. Our engagement is guided by the mission to strengthen the science and the scientific endeavor so that they can best benefit societal well-being. This is based on our conviction that societies can most successfully navigate in a constantly changing environment these days if they have access to reliable information and can question things also critically, because we feel that knowledge empowers and creates trust. And therefore, two pillars of our work will be the focus of my contribution and what is normally summarized in a nutshell as science for policy on the one hand and policy for science on the other. And I will look both on these two activities at national level and how this translates into our contributions in Europe. And so to start with, allow me a few introductory words on the roots of the Swiss Academies and their embeddedness in society, because that's important to have a good understanding of what they're doing at national level, but eventually also in the European context. For an understanding of the mission of the Swiss Academies and their role in today's world, it is useful to consider the origins of the Swiss Academies and their important roots that they have in society. And it's important to note that compared to other regions in Europe, the establishment of the academies in Switzerland began relatively late and did not involve governmental in particular, or any other central institution in that sense. Instead, it was truly bottom up. And this is illustrated very well with the photo that you see on this slide, and which was taken on the occasion of the 100th birthday of the formation of what is now the Swiss Academy of Sciences. The photo shows the representatives of the societies that made up this academy in 1915. And it were also these societies that had established the academy a century earlier, sorry. And these societies were and are two kinds of scientific organizations: associations of scientists and researchers on the one hand, but also regional associations with lay people, so not qualified scientists in that sense, who were purely interested in an understanding of their environment, of their surrounding, if you like, on the other. But common to both types of organizations was that they aimed at the advancement of science and its service to the country and its population. In addition to the Swiss Academy of Sciences that I just mentioned, the Academies for Medical Sciences and then Humanities and Social Sciences were both formed and came into existence around World War II, while the Academy of Engineering came into being in the early 1980s, as was the case, by the way, in most countries around the globe as far as the engineering sciences are concerned. In 2006, the four academies then decided to form what is now called the Swiss Academies of Arts and Sciences as an umbrella organization, in an attempt to work more closely across disciplines on the one hand, but also with the ambition to have one address to go to for policymaking and policymakers, but also for the purpose of international representation, such as, for example, my presentation today. But despite these changes in structure and organization over the years, the notion and also the self-conception of being community-oriented and not elitist in an ivory tower remains part of the Swiss Academy's DNA until today. And as one expression of this, two of the four disciplinary academies, as you can see on the slides, are still composed by scientific and community-based society and not individual fellows. But even more importantly, it finds expression in the work of the Swiss Academies, in their Science for Policy work that I mentioned at the beginning will be the first focus of my presentation, and to which I now turn. Collectively, the Swiss Academies build bridges between science and society, as I mentioned at the very beginning. And one important aspect of that work, on which I now concentrate, concerns the provision of scientific advice to society at large and policymaking in particular. The Swiss Academies do this by relying on their network of scientists who volunteer their time and expertise for that purpose. So we draw on all the scientific societies that we have spread around the country, and their members are professors, PhD students, and they work at all the different institutions, higher education institutions that we have around the country. And so with the support of that scientific network, the Swiss Academies serve as a platform to develop science-based options for action to help address challenges that confront society and the environment. And I specifically say options because the academies do not prescribe recommendations, but rather we indicate options and possible consequences if this or that option is taken. We illustrate the consequences this or that option will or may have. This Science for Policy advice work finds expression in several ways and products also. And a particularly important product are the so-called fact sheets that we have produced for a number of years already, and of which you can see 3 examples on this slide. They're usually 6 to 8 pages long, and they summarize really in short, concise manner, the key issues at stake on a particular topic and the options, as I just mentioned, for dealing with them. And these publications are used to proactively address policymakers, but also government administration and civil society to the best extent possible. To achieve the highest possible attention, of course, among all these different audiences, the timing of the release of such publications and also other products and related outreach activities are central. And an especially good example to illustrate that is a publication from November 2016 on the implications of global climate change in Switzerland. And this fact sheet, of which you see the cover now, synthesized the findings of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, and also of National Scientific Studies. And as a result, the fact sheet showed up the consequences to be expected from climate change for society and the environment in Switzerland. And it points out, as I said earlier on already, options and measures for actors, for the different actors, be it in politics, but also in the economic sector, private sector, and society to help address them. A media campaign was launched prior to the publication of the report with online video statements by prominent figures, such as this well-known member of parliament, well-known, I must say, at the national level, of course. The actual publication of the report was accompanied by a media conference in the morning and a scientific symposium in the afternoon, which brought across the main messages from these reports. And all of this activity led to contributions on TV, on radio, and in the print media. And one of the scholars who had contributed to the report was interviewed, in effect, during the news at prime time on TV the same evening that the report had been launched. The report also had an impact on the in the political arena, because for one, the government, the federal government, pledged to take into account the findings of the report when determining measures to further reduce greenhouse gas emissions beyond 2020, and to intensify work on measures at national and provincial level to mitigate the consequences of climate change. And in Parliament, which is obviously equally important in addition to the federal government, there was a debate on the Paris Climate Agreement a few months later, and several parliamentarians referred to the Academis report and helped them to argue in favor of ratifying the Paris Agreement. And eventually, it did lead to a 70% majority in Parliament, and so Switzerland could ratify the Paris Climate Agreement. This Science for Policy work in Switzerland is paralleled by our engagement at the European level. As I said earlier on, I'm now giving the example of what we're doing at national level translates into the European context. And here at the fore is the contribution of the Swiss Academies to what is an academy consortium with the acronym SAPEA, which stands for Science Advice for Policy by European Academies. This is a consortium which is composed of 5 European umbrella organizations. It was formed in 2017 to collectively, across disciplines, support the work of the European Commission by providing interdisciplinary scientific evidence and advice. The Swiss Academies belong to 4 of these umbrella organizations and thus assist the endeavor of SAPEA by nominating scientists from their networks to SAPEA working groups for the drafting of reports, but also for the reviewing early draft reports. And I would just like to mention 2 examples of how this actually is done. And and we're also scientists from Switzerland did make a contribution. The first report concerns the improvement of CO2 emission by cars. And this was triggered by the scandal around the time. It was in 2016. You may probably recall that, which had involved a major German car producer. And the purpose of this particular report was to prevent future such cases where a car producer would be juggling with the testing in such a way that it would favor its selling, the selling of cars. The other report, of which you see the cover to the right now, deals with biodegradable plastics, and it recommended the limited use in cases where a reduction, the reuse or recycling of normal plastic was not possible. And the findings of this report informed the European Commission's policy framework on bio-based, biodegradable, and compostable plastics. And I've particularly chosen these two examples because they illustrate how scientific evidence and advice can effectively inform policy making. And I also chose these two examples because they reflect, and these two examples are on climate change and the environment. And I specifically chose them as well because they're at the heart of activities of the Swiss Academies, because these two issues are of particular concern to our work, and they have been since the 1980s. The presentation so far dealt with the role of the Swiss Academies in contributing transdisciplinary scientific evidence on issues we estimate to be of critical importance for societal well-being in Switzerland, but also in Europe, of course. But I now turn to the other side of the same coin, if you like, of our mission, which is to strengthen research and science in themselves so that they can, in effect, benefit society and policy making, as was the argument at the outset of my presentation. And the example I choose for that purpose are research infrastructures, because due to their size, certainly in terms of long-term orientation, but also the required funding, and in many cases, also regarding the land needed to build them, the establishment and operation of such research infrastructures, and by that I mean large research infrastructures, require a cooperation across boundaries and across disciplines, because no one actor can do that alone these days. Here at home in Switzerland, the academies were mandated by the relevant government agency to lead and coordinate a process that engaged the scientific community really bottom up, with the purpose of producing roadmaps that identify those research infrastructures that will be important in the coming years to achieve the goals of the scientific communities in Switzerland. And this work, which was again for which we were again relying on the network of scientists across the whole country, this work resulted in 7 roadmaps in the different disciplines, namely biology, chemistry, geosciences, astronomy, particle physics, photon science, and neutron science. And this slide shows the covers of these 7 reports. And these thematic roadmaps will effectively be included in the next national, and that is a national then, roadmap for research infrastructures for the period 2025-28. And it will, as such, provide the basis for decision-making in Parliament on the investment of the necessary funds to allow for the further progress on these research facilities of national interest. Extending this engagement that I just spoke about at national level to Europe, the Swiss Academies are also nominating experts to what is called European Strategy Forum on Research Infrastructures. And as you see on the slide, there are different thematic strategy working groups which are part or which form this organization or this platform, which is called ESFRI. The mission of ESFRI is to support a coherent approach to policymaking on research infrastructures in Europe, but also to facilitate multilateral initiatives leading to the better use and development of, again, large infrastructures, be it at the EU, but also at the international level. And the purpose really of this work is to maintain and to attract the best researchers from around the globe, because competitive and open access to high quality research infrastructures supports and benchmarks the quality of scientific activities in Europe. And with the delegation of scientists from their networks in Switzerland, the Swiss Academies contribute and foster this work for top quality research infrastructures in Europe. Beyond this very specific engagement that I've now detailed regarding large research infrastructures, and still in the policy for science arena, or science for science, if you like, the Swiss Academies have a long-standing commitment to the work of ALEA, which stands for All European Academies. This European Federation of Academies of Sciences and Humanities bring together more than 50 organizations from over 40 countries, not only in the EU area, but in the Council of Europe region, which is, of course, a wider area, as you know. Key among the activities of ALEA is its mission to improve the framework conditions for research in Europe, with the ambition to promote the best possible scientific research. And so back in 2012, and I think you should be able to see the writing, it's a bit small. So back in 2012, when the further development of the European research area was already on the political agenda, as it is again now, ALEA provided input on behalf of the European Academies to the communication of the European Commission. So that's the communication from the European Commission is sort of a statement or a proposal for policy action. And so ALEA provided input on this particular communication, which was on a reinforced European research area partnership for excellence and growth. And the country, in their contribution, or in its contribution, ALEA emphasized that research integrity was important to underpin excellence as a first message, but it also advocated not to focus on the EU area alone, but to embrace the Council of Europe region, to find a good balance between curiosity and agenda-driven research. And it made already then a strong point on the importance of open science to ensure an effective dissemination of publicly funded research results. As an outflow of this interaction and as a consequence of its recommendation, or one of its input also, the European Commission mandated ALEA to revise the European Code of Conduct for Research Integrity, which dated back from 2011. The revised version, of which you see the cover now, was completed in 2017, and I had the pleasure to work on the working group that drafted or revised this document. And this document was then handed over by ALEA, by the then ALEA President Günther Stock, who you see on the slide, handed it over to Carlos Moedas, who you probably remember, who was then the European Commissioner for Research and Innovation. And as you probably know as well, the adherence to the standards set in this framework document, this European Code of Conduct, is compulsory today for all researchers who obtain funding from or through the European Framework Programme for Research and Innovation. At the heart of ALEA's work lies beyond, and that's beyond this particular example, lies a strong connection to the cultural, but also scientific and humanist tradition of the European Enlightenment, which spearheaded at the end of the day concepts of human dignity, democracy, equality, the rule of law, but also human rights. And in that context, ALEA awards on an annual basis the Madame de Staël Prize for cultural values. And it awards this prize to intellectuals or scholars who have significantly contributed to the cultural values of Europe and to the idea of European integration. And thereby, by awarding this prize, this underlines the importance and the value of such intellectual activities for the advancement of the European project and the common values that are inherent in that project and that I just mentioned. This year, and nominated by the Swiss Academies, the prize went to Helen Keller, who you see on this slide. She's chair for public law, European and public international law at the University of Zurich. But she particularly, she obtained this prize, she was awarded this prize because of her particular role as previous judge at the European Court of Human Rights, and also as a member of the UN Human Rights Committee. And Alea awarded the prize to her in recognition of her important contribution in those two contexts to the development and consolidation of human rights jurisprudence in Europe, as well as her commitment to fundamental rights. This brings me to the end of my presentation on the work of the Swiss Academies related to society and in what way we do and try to contribute to the development of European culture and civilization, as the program session title suggests. And I hope to have conveyed to you the multifaceted dimensions these activities have by showing a bouquet of activities, be it science to policy work, but also science to science or policy for science activities in the very different fields. And so in closing, I thank you for your considered attention and certainly remain available for any follow-up questions or feedback if there's time. I see that I was not taking the 30 minutes, but that we are at 11 o'clock as foreseen in the program. Thank you very much, and back to the organizers.
Thank you very much. It has gone perfectly well. A warm thanks to the Dr. Roger Pfister, head of the International Cooperation, Swiss Academies of Arts and Sciences, Bern, Switzerland, for this interesting presentation and for having drawn our attention to the vital, specific role of the Swiss Academies of Sciences and Arts to strengthen and maintain the infrastructures that are needed for a successful communication within the world of science. Thank you once again.
Thank you.